Fashion and dress in Mesopotamia, clothing, footwear, and accessories, was not only functional but defined one's social status and developed from a simple loincloth in the Ubaid period, c. 5000, 4100 BCE, to brightly coloured robes and dresses by the time of Sassanian Empire, 224, 651 CE. Styles changed, but essential form and function remained the same. As in any civilization, the upper class and nobility wore more expensive clothes of higher quality, and by the Early Dynastic Period, 2900 to 2334 BCE, if not earlier, clothing identified one's social standing and, often, one's profession. In the prehistoric era, based on statuary, men and women wore the most basic articles of clothing, possibly made from plants, but as civilization developed. Archaeologists confirm that textiles were among the first of human inventions. Plant fibers may have been twisted, sewn, and plaited as far back as the Old Stone Age, some 25,000 years ago. In time, after the domestication of animals, wool became the most common basic material for clothing and leather for footwear, at least for the upper class. Wealthier citizens could afford brightly dyed fashion, while poorer people wore basic white, though these clothes still seem to have been ornamented with designs, even as the skirts and loincloths of the Ubaid period may have been. Although Mesopotamia is often cited as creating clothing, among its many other firsts, people around the world would have developed the concept independently. Mesopotamia, however, specifically Sumer, is the first region in the world to have recorded the development of clothing and accessories through their art. Mesopotamian art and architecture provide evidence of this progress from simple to more complex styles, as well as how one's clothes made the man in establishing social rank. As with many modern-day aspects of life often taken for granted, clothing had a beginning, and this seems to have been the point at which people found the need to cover themselves. As Bertman observes, according to the Bible, the founders of the fashion industry were Adam and Eve. For when they ate the educational apple, and for the first time recognized their nakedness, they set about sewing fig leaves together to hide the bare truth. If Sumer was the geographical inspiration for the Garden of Eden, as many believe, the world's first clothes were labeled "Made in Mesopotamia." Figurines from the Ubaid period seem to depict women wearing simple loincloths and, in one case, an ankle-length skirt without a top. By the Uruk period, 4100–2900 BCE, men and women wore ornamented knee-length kilts or ankle-length skirts known as konakes and, based on evidence from cylinder seals and statuary, accessorized with hats, headbands, and jewelry. Some form of footwear is also evident in the artwork, most likely sandals, and in some pieces it seems the figures are also wearing decorated leggings under the kaunakes. Fashion at this time extended even to dog collars, as evidenced by a golden dog pendant dated to c. 3300 BCE, showing a striped collar, whereas earlier dog collars appear to have been simple rope. By the time of the Early Dynastic Period, though, as noted, possibly during the Uruk period, the length of one's kaunake identified one's social standing. The lower class, including slaves, wore the knee-length konake, while royalty and the upper class wore the ankle-length style. Scholar Samuel Noah Kramer describes the fashion of this era. The men either were clean-shaven or wore long beards, and long hair parted in the middle. The most common form of dress was a kind of flounced skirt, over which long cloaks of felt were sometimes worn. Later, the chiton, or long skirt, took the place of the flounced skirt. Covering the skirt was a big, fringed shawl, which was carried over the left shoulder, leaving the right arm free. Women often wore dresses which looked like long, tufted shawls, covering them from head to foot and leaving only the right shoulder bare. Their hair was usually parted in the middle and braided into a heavy pigtail, which was then wound around the head. They often wore elaborate headdresses consisting of hair ribbons, beads, and pendants. Based on artworks such as the Royal Standard of c. 2600 BCE, the king at this time wore a long robe, or the ankle-length konaka without a shirt, while soldiers and attendants wore the short koneke and a cloak fastened at the neck. Some artworks also show people wearing a simple tunic that appears to fasten at the shoulders and is belted at the waist. Musicians, dancers, and other entertainers also wore the short koneke or performed in a loincloth. Fashionable accessories during this era included necklaces and pendants worn by both men and women, rings, earrings, ornamental daggers, bracelets, and armbands, and fringed shawls which may have been ornamented with beads. Men and women both used perfume, and the Sumerians seem to also have invented deodorant, possibly as early as c. 3500 BCE. Significant evidence regarding the fashion and accessories of the upper class during the Early Dynastic Period comes from the discoveries made at the Royal Cemetery of Ur by Sir Leonard Woolley in 1922, especially those associated with Queen Pwabi, LC 2600 BCE, best known for her elaborate headdress. The fashion of the Akkadian period, 2334 to 2218 BCE, followed the same basic form established by the Sumerians. Priests at this time, for example, wore the same ankle-length robes they had in the early dynastic period, while both temple and palace personnel wore the short kilts. Temple and palace employees were both given a clothing allowance and generally were better dressed than the common people.